that, I would say over to you, Antonia.
All right, thank you so much. Also, bear with me because this was also a bit short notice, and I was really getting interested. I work with this topic, but I also got interested in it due to some recent political situations here in Germany. If you're interested, you may ask me later about it. But yeah, let's get started on corporate digital responsibility and why it really matters for everyone that builds digital products, basically. So this quote most of you probably know from The Economist from 2017, the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but data. And it was written in 2017, but since then, the volume of data that we collect has grown by orders of wild magnitude, especially since the implementation of AI. And so has our ability to use it in ways that really affect real people, our users, ourselves, etc. So their access, our real people's access to housing, job applications, the content we see, the products we use, the products we can and can't use. If data is the most valuable resource, then what we do with data and who gets to decide about data and how to use it and how to collect it might be the most important question that we're really not asking loudly enough in our daily work. So I'm Antonia. Some of you might know me. I'm a digital designer and a consultant, and I work at the intersection of inclusive UX, accessibility, and sustainable digital design. And I want to start with a scenario that might sound familiar to a couple of you. So imagine a team has built a new onboarding flow. They've done the research, the interviews, the usability testing, the 2 rounds of iteration, probably more rounds of iteration. The launch goes really well. Completion rates are up. Everybody moves on to the next sprint. But 6 months later, somebody on support notices a pattern. A small group of users, maybe 3 or 4%, keeps getting stuck at the same step. When somebody finally decides to look closely, they find that these users are, for example, on older devices, on slower connections. They're using assistive technology. They were never in our research pool. Nobody excluded them deliberately. They just never showed up, and nobody cared to ask why. The product worked, just not for everyone. You've probably been in a version of this room. I know that I definitely have. And it's not a story about bad intentions or shitty people. It's a story about what happens when responsibility isn't built into how we work. So what actually is corporate digital responsibility? CDR is the framework for thinking about exactly this. It's defined as the principle of underpinning an organization's ethical, fair, and protective use of data and technology when we're engaging with users, employees, and our society in general. So the Digital Responsibility Lab at Bern University put it really well, I thought. Digital systems should be conceived, designed, and governed to maximize social benefit, minimize harm, and remain accountable to the stakeholders they affect. And I think stakeholders are really important here. So I would add, it's also about knowing who your stakeholders actually are, the wide, like all of the stakeholders that we usually kind of lose focus on when we're focusing on our small environmental part. Because if your research doesn't reflect your real user base, you've already made a CDR decision, you just didn't realize it. And the reason CDR has become much more urgent is that the scale and the speed of digital technology has much outpaced the frameworks that we have for governing it, both in our literal governments, but also in our institutions, in the organizations or companies that we work in. The risks are bigger, and so are the consequences that we and everybody else is facing. An academic research published earlier this year at the California Management Review described it, I think, quite clearly. Digitalization doesn't just create new ethical issues. It intensifies existing ones. I would even say it escalates them, at least AI does, and makes old problems appear in new and much harder to see or spot forms. And at the same time, the people that are affected, users, regulators, the public, and ourselves as well at work, are paying more attention than they used to. And they're working faster when users are working faster when they decide that a company has crossed the line. This is what I'm also very interested in. So here are a couple of examples from the past couple of years, mostly this and last year. You might remember this, been very recent, when OpenAI announced a new partnership with the Pentagon. 2.5 million users migrated immediately to other tools, such as Anthropic, for example. When Duolingo, which used to be, I think this is a spot-on text, it wasn't just a language app, it was a cultural phenomenon, especially with millennials, millennials, and Gen Z. And when Duolingo announced it was going AI first overnight and replaced its contractors, the backlash from the entire community was swift. I, for example, was one of, I believe it was like in the tens of millions users who left overnight. And it wasn't because of what they communicated, but because of how they previously stated that they valued people. Euphoria is a makeup brand that was a very much hyped makeup brand, and they faced calls to be canceled and eventually had to shut down 2 years ago after persistent criticism about a lack of inclusive shade ranges. Then, of course, we had, which I didn't include in the pictures, Replit, whose AI assistant was told not to delete a production database, deleted the whole database anyway, and then tried to cover it up. And very recently, Meta and YouTube are currently facing legal liability for social media addiction, for creating social media addiction in their end users. So none of these use cases that are very closely relating to CDR are edge cases. They are the absolute direction in which we travel. Users and regulators are drawing harder lines much faster. So I'd like to give you a bit of a way of seeing where responsibility shows up in the work that you already do. And these 7 aspects that I'll show you are not really like separate silos. They are interact, they overlap, and in most product decisions, more than one of them is in play at the same time. And the question underneath each of them is the same. Who does this serve and who does it harm? Because that's actually the question that we should always ask. And I know in UX we often ask what could go wrong. This inherits this as well. So number 1, of course, is data ethics and privacy. Data is not a byproduct, it is our responsibility, and every digital product collects data, and we have to ask what happens next to it. And when The Economist called data the world's most valuable research, the research really backs this up. Service firms now have access to vast streams of customer data. When we have a look at how the CEOs of huge AI companies such as Palantir phrase how they would like to pretty much surveil the public, we really get into like scary fields of AI and surveillance and data and systems. But the access that we have to our customer data, for example, is behavioral, real-time, it's interfered, but that offers real competitive advantage to us, but the same research also shows a consistent pattern. The more valuable our data becomes, the greater the temptation to collect more of it, see OpenAI, using it in more ways and worrying about the consequences later. Privacy by design, and this is what we're talking about here, kind of flips this logic. You build protection in from the start, just like you build in accessibility, we're coming to that, and sustainability in from the start. You only collect what you need. You give people real control over their own information. I know that in the Hamburg Design Group, we've been talking a lot about digital sovereignty, and this also closely links to that. And for B2B companies, this applies to your clients' data just as much as it does to end users, because the question is not whether you're compliant, the question is whether you're trustworthy. So the second is algorithmic accountability, because algorithms make decisions that affect people's lives every day. Who gets shown a job ad? Whose loan application gets approved? Whose face gets recognized by a security system and whose doesn't? Workday's hiring AI, for example, was accused of systematically filtering out older applicants, people of color applicants, and disabled people. SafeRent's algorithm treated low-income renters as high risk just for the demographic profile. In both cases, these companies said the algorithm made a mistake, but the research is clear. Algorithms reflect our human assumptions, blind spots, and training data of the people who built them. They're not neutral, and the algorithm decided is not an answer to the question of who's responsible. For those of you thinking or using AI tools in your products or workflows right now, this isn't any of your future problems. This is very much your present problem. And that brings us back to the scenario that I opened with, because accessibility is about outcomes. Can everybody actually use what we build? People with visual, motor, cognitive, or hearing disabilities, neurodivergent people, people on slow connections, people on older devices, people who don't interact with digital products the way that your personas do, with lower digital literacy, for example. All of those is a significant portion of your actual user base. Look at Germany, we're a much older population here, for example. But accessibility alone isn't enough here, because inclusive design means involving the people you're designing for throughout your entire process. Not as testers, but as the true experts and decision makers, because they're affected by your product. And when the team building a product doesn't reflect the diversity of our society, aka the diversity of the people that you want your product to use, you get some gaps. And some of them show up in your support queue, and others take 6 months to notice, and others again might put a blocker in who it is that you could actually reach and sell your product to. So market share, in other words. And this one often surprises people. Digital products are not weightless. Data centers consume enormous amounts of energy. Probably some of you have heard Torsten speak before, so you know about this. And AI model training, for example, has significant carbon costs. Research shows it's growing as fast as generative AI scales. Every unoptimized image, every autoplay video, every unnecessary API call adds to this load. And sustainable digital designs means thinking about the environmental costs and what we build, from infrastructure decisions to the true product longevity. The same California Management Review that I cited earlier points to ultra-fast fashion enabling by real-time data as an example of how digitalization can intensify environmental harm also on the physical side here, on the physical product side. And the flip side is also true. Used well, AI and data can help, for example, accessibility and support sustainability goals. But the question is whether we're designing for that or whether it's an afterthought. And users have a right to understand the products that they actually use. What data is being collected, how the decisions are made, who has access to our own information and why. This sounds very obvious because we're all affected as consumers as well, but most digital products are not honest by default. Information is buried in terms and conditions. Consent flows are designed to help get people to agree, not to help them understand. We all probably know about deceptive patterns. Transparency means designing products where the honest version is the default version. And for companies, this extends to being clear with your own clients about how you use their data, what AI tools you're using, and where the boundaries of your responsibilities actually sit. Trust is built slowly and lost very, very fast, as we saw in the examples that I previously showed. And this is an aspect that connects most directly to why I started working in this space. Some products made harm easier to commit or harder to escape. That's rarely our intention or anyone's intention. But when you design a reporting flow that takes 8 steps, when moderation is under-resourced or blocked in some examples that we probably all know, and when the path of least resistance for a user is also the path of most exposure, you've made a design decision with consequences. Safety by design means thinking about how a product could be misused before it is misused. It means building a systems that protect the people who need protection, not just the ones who complain the loudest. And that brings me to the last one, platforms. Because the decisions that platforms make about what content to allow, what to amplify, and what to remove have real consequences for real people. And I'm not just talking about social media platforms here. Digital violence, hate speech, and organized misinformations don't spread by accident. They spread through systems that we designed or that we left undesigned in ways that allowed it. And there are 3 layers of accountability here. The platforms themselves and the choices that they make about moderation, amplification, and monetization. Then second one, governments and regulators who are working with varying speed and effectiveness to create binding rules, the EU, for example, and us, the civil society. Organizations, advocates, and individuals pushing back. In Germany, we have Hate Aid, for example, supporting victims and refusing to accept the current state as inevitable. And none of these layers can do it alone, just like we can't do it alone in our corporations. And for those of us building products that sit in and or on connected to these platforms, we're part of the system too. There's a chart in software engineering research that I absolutely love, the relative cost of fixing defects, that shows that fixing a problem at the design stage costs 1 unit. At implementation, it costs 6.5. At testing, 15. And maintenance after launch, 100. The same logic applies to CDR. The cost of building responsibility is always lower than the cost of rebuilding after a harm has occurred. And that harm isn't only reputational. It's legal, it's financial, it's in our systems. It's really for the users on receiving end, it's financial, it's real. Research on CDR frames this as a calculus. The benefits of good practice, risk mitigation, brand equity, trust, usability, and accessibility, for example, against the opportunity costs of doing it well. The companies that take this seriously become more trustworthy, build more resilient products, and develop teams that are genuinely better equipped to build things that work for the full range of people who use them. I know I've already said this, but it's really, really important to me. Because digital responsibility is not one thing. We have just learned. It's data, it's algorithms, environment, transparency, safety, and platform power. It shows up in every single decision that we make about what to build and how to build it. Again, when we take it seriously, it makes us and our organizations more trustworthy, our products more resilient, and our teams are better equipped to build products, things, platforms, algorithms, etc., that work for everybody who uses them. And this is important in inclusive design, not only for the people whose lives most closely resemble their own, our own and our teams, etc. So, of course, I want to leave you with something concrete. I worked out 5 questions that aren't an audit framework and they're not a checklist, but they're kind of questions that tend to not get asked until something has already gone wrong. And then, as we just learned, the cost of fixing it is getting much higher. So you don't really need digital responsibility strategy to use them. You can ask any of them in a sprint, in a brief, in your team on Monday morning, in a client meeting, or the next time a product decision lands on your desk that doesn't maybe feel quite right, but you're not really sure why. I know that Jonas is going to probably send out the slides, or you can take a picture of them.
I will for sure.
Perfect. And oh yeah, of course, I'd love to keep this conversation going beyond today. If anything that I just said resonated, or you're just curious about how all of this connects to your own context, you can always reach out to me. And behind the QR, you'll of course get my contact details. Yeah, if you want to think through what it looks like in your specific context, this is what I do and I love to do. And of course, because we're a diverse group here, I love to hear from you. So I also brought some conversation openers so that we can keep talking.
Very good. Thank you for making my job very easy by finishing with questions. But first of all, thank you very much, Antonia, for putting this together. Super interesting. I think for me, the hope, perhaps very optimistic, is similar to corporate social responsibility, is that this could become a big thing. And you offered a perspective on product decisions. I think corporate digital responsibility, given how much money and how much time is spent on digital, it could be a really big practice. And at least I'm hoping it will become a really big practice where people will launch corporate digital responsibility programs and assess and audit and engage stakeholders and all these corporate things that seems to be not really happening at the moment when it comes to digital. That's a little bit more, all right, we made an investment, let's just now have a good Black Friday and move on.
I'm just going to open this like this, because then I can see everyone, which is nice.
That's okay, and you can also stop sharing. That's totally fine. I will share the slides and do a follow-up blog post as in the past, and I will also offer to stop talking. So if anybody else wants to chime in, offer feedback, questions, perspectives, now is a good time. All right, yeah, let's try, Philip.
Hi, great presentation, Antonia. Very clear, superb.
Thank you.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
Is there do you think there's going to be some form of accreditation? Because what people like is to say, look, we've got a little stamp that says we meet this standard. Or is it too early for there to be a benchmark for this kind of behavior? Because I think that would be good if you could say, I've got ISO 9000 type of thing on your website, you know?
I'd love like a little DIN norm certificate. That's what makes my German heart glow. No, I actually think this could be something that's developing. When I researched this before I started writing on LinkedIn about it, because all of the different aspects pull into the work that I'm doing, I saw that some people at McKinsey started offering audits for this. And when McKinsey starts, it might not be so far away from getting something like ESG for corporate responsibility. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that something like this is in the works. And the tiny little parts of it, so for example, for accessibility, etc., you can already get certificates. So the smaller parts of it, and for privacy and data as well, there's also some forms where you can kind of prove your transparency. So for the parts of the 7 aspects, there's already this. And because McKinsey already started, a couple of people at McKinsey that I looked at, I hope that something like this is in the works, because I truly, I agree with you. It would make things easier.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Antonia.
Very good. Thank you, Philip. Let's come back after the opening struggles with mute. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Do you think this has a chance of taking off?
That I wanted to leave you with, right?
Yes. Perhaps Shannon, what's your initial feedback on this?
I mean, this is super interesting and extremely relevant, especially with AI dominating so much of the conversation. I had one tiny question, because you had a slide earlier that it had this big question. It was, who does this serve? And then there was a second part to it, and I missed it.
Yes.
So I was curious.
Who does it serve, and who does it harm?
Who does it harm? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of put into one sentence when we in UX look at what could go wrong, the unintended consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, it's super interesting. And I really appreciate all of these points you're putting out, especially things like what platforms you're using. I think that might go a little under the radar with some companies. You know, they think they're doing what they can, but then they're using a hosting service that maybe is not so ethically transparent.
Yes, because those small parts can really fall under the wagon wheel.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very good point.
And I think awareness is rising. I think for those following Danish news, I know that's a teeny tiny subset of everybody, but Novo Nordisk is the largest company here. And I think it was just last week that they signed a mega deal with OpenAI. And it was really interesting to see that that did not only get positive press, which would have been the normal thing, like Danish company teams up with Silicon Valley giant, innovation, we're winning. But this actually got some negative press and some question marks. And I think it's a sign, I'm hoping at least, of an increased awareness. Because we didn't have that just a few years ago.
Did any of you read the huge New Yorker expose about Sam Altman?
No, but perhaps you can drop it to me, and then I will get it into.
Yes, it's behind a paywall, but it's
okay.
From the same author that I can only recommend. It is a long read. Last week, I worked myself through this one and the 15 pages article from the New York Times about the militarization of AI and Anthropic versus OpenAI. And it's a huge read about Sam Altman, kind of an tell-all expose by the same man that wrote the massive expose that started the Me Too movement, the Harvey Weinstein expose. And I thought it was really interesting when I put together this presentation, because in the whole data ethics and privacy part, when I mentioned how data is being collected, and when we start collecting data, we might have a different intention than later on along the line, because OpenAI was founded as a non-profit. Duolingo was also founded as a company that was supposed to make language learning accessible. But the minute these, I'm very sorry, male founders turned millionaires, even billionaires, it changed. And now the data is being misused. And this way how a person is so closely connected, and what then transpires with all of our data and in the military context and everything as well, is really worth a read, because it makes it much more tangible how interconnected all of this is, and how much then, this is why I showed the map, this is why I put together a map of stakeholders, because when we're working in here, for example, in a product and design team, we might forget about our energy infrastructure, etc. But we're going to have to face the consequences of this with AI and water consumption, the data, the European Union, and how everything is going to transpire with the US. So keeping in mind that this has to do with us, whether we sit here on this end or this end, and how things can explode or implode. Yeah, I will send it to you, Jonas. I can only recommend reading this article by the New Yorker.
Very good. Thank you very much, Antonia, for everything you've shared and gotten together for us. I really appreciate it. I think to be continued. And we even managed some Q&A as well. Thanks for getting together the 7 different aspects of corporate digital responsibility. And yeah, hope to see everybody soon. And let's keep this conversation going because there's certainly much to unpack here. Thank you once again. That's all we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.